25 years ago, yoga was something that was seen as slightly odd, slightly counterculture, something fringe, something that people who lived outside the mainstream did. This was true in the West, where the image was, accurate or not, of some new agey person in loose clothing with loose hair sitting cross-legged or standing on their head. This was also true, if to a lesser degree, in India, with the added factor of the imagery being of dreadlock sadhus or shaven-head monks who have dedicated their lives full-time to spiritual practice, people living outside the norms and concerns and obligations of family life. Today, the scene is far different in both places. Global yoga is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year fitness, health, and wellness industry with all sorts of people from all walks of life and with a full range of spiritual inclinations, including plenty of people who discount anything spiritual taking part. Yoga today is commonplace, with studios in even some of the smallest towns in the United States. What this version of yoga taught at these studios is usually a physical pursuit, often a vigorous one. Meditation and pranayama have come to be more common studio offerings over the past decade, yes, but stretchy workout wear and sweaty bodies moving through often athletic sequences of postures, almost always to a carefully curated playlist of music, is the usual class. There are even novel variations on yoga, like goat yoga, yoga with wine, beer yoga, that, to put it mildly, push the boundaries of what yoga actually is. All of these are perplexing at best to the traditionalist, who will tell anyone listening that these aren't really yoga. Ultimately, though, yoga is much more than all of this. The physical practice is just one small part of yoga as it was passed down from teacher to students for millennia before Lululemon or goats got involved. That bigger tradition is what we're going to talk about today. I'm Matt McDermott, and this is All About Hinduism. At its broadest, yoga, which comes from the Sanskrit root word yuj, means to unite. Most Hindu texts on yoga discuss it as a practice to calm and control the senses and the mind. The Bhagavad Gita, one of the most widely revered sources of Hindu knowledge, dating back some 2,500 years at least, speaks of 4 types of yoga, 4 yogic paths: bhakti yoga, devotional practices; jnana yoga, intellectual study; karma yoga, service and action done selflessly; and dhyana, concentration, which is also referred to as Raja Yoga in some other texts. All of these are useful paths towards moksha, which is the ultimate goal of life in Hindu thought. In some schools of thought, these different paths of yoga are viewed as sequential, with Jnana Yoga being the last. But in others, they're seen as methods that can be practiced simultaneously, or as paths that a person can take based on personal preference and inclination, or where they are in life. Of the 4, Jnana Yoga, as explained in the Gita, provides a clear and recognizable image for people in the West. Indeed, it is the image of a person sitting in meditation. The Gita reads, quote, "Having the mind actively focused on a single point, with thought and sense activity controlled, sitting on a seat, one should practice yoga for purification of the self. With an aligned body, head, and neck, keeping these steady without movement, focusing the vision toward the tip of one's nose without looking in any direction." Such a description of yoga is similar to the very opening part of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the most famous text used as a basis for yoga as taught in the West. Explaining what the intent of yoga is, and of the paths of yoga here, we're talking about Raja Yoga, Patanjali states, "Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind." Every yoga teacher training in the West today incorporates the Yoga Sutras, and every person coming through one of these programs will learn about the 8 limbs of yoga that Patanjali outlines: yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. The first 2 are ethical principles and practices, the most basic guidance and prerequisites for practicing yoga. We've gone over them in a previous episode. Asana, the physical part of yoga, only sketchily presented in the Yoga Sutras but described in more detail in other sources. Pranayama, breathing exercises; pratyahara, sense withdrawal; dharana, concentration, sort of pre-meditation; dhyana, meditation; samadhi, self-realization. Asana is just 1/8 of the overall practice of this one of 4 paths of yoga. At the best, asana practice is a thin sliver of yoga writ large. Now, asana practice alone has been shown in numerous studies to have a wide range of health benefits. Not that traditional practitioners needed these studies to back up what they've said for centuries. Lowering blood pressure, relief of back and joint pain, supporting the immune system, increasing or maintaining mobility as we age. In children, practicing asana, moving the body and controlling the breath, can reduce ADHD and has been shown to improve behavior and grades. Even one of the two most globally well-known asana teachers over the past 75 years, BKS Iyengar, stated, quote, "Asanas are not meant for physical fitness, but for conquering the elements, energy, and so on." So, how to balance the energy in the body, how to control the 5 elements, and how to balance the various aspects of the mind without mixing them all together, and how to be able to perceive the differences between the gunas and to experience that there is something behind them, operating in the world of man, that is what asanas are for. The process is slow and painstaking, but a steady inquiry facilitates a growing awareness. The purpose, then, of the physical practice of yoga is really ensuring the physical body is in the best condition it can be so that the long practice of the other parts of yoga and the other paths of yoga can be done for as long as possible and therefore have the best chance of success. In a future episode, we'll go into more detail about the physical parts of yoga. It's fully beneficial in a person's life, but the overarching point, and I'll frame this positively, is that yoga asana is great, and there's so much else in the yoga tradition that is also great, and that if all you're doing is asana, you're missing out. So let's go into it a bit. What we were just talking about, how yoga is most often thought of in the West, falls under Raja Yoga. Here are brief overviews of the other 3 paths of yoga. Karma Yoga. As Satguru Bodhinatha Velan Swami explains, quote, "The word karma means action or deed. In its most profound sense, karma yoga is the doing of all actions in a spiritual manner, consciously, selflessly, excellently, as an offering to the divine." End quote. This path can be practiced in an explicitly religious setting, say volunteering or working at a temple, but it can be, with the right attitude, practiced anywhere in life, at your home, in your career, everywhere. Continuing quoting from the same source, quote, "How we view the world is central to karma yoga. To some, the world is a place where we have a chance to pursue pleasure. To others, it provides opportunities to acquire wealth. Others focus on the many problems in the world and categorize it as troubled. To a karma yogi, it is none of the above. Swami Vivekananda states, the world is a grand moral gymnasium wherein we all have to take exercise so as to become stronger and stronger spiritually." End quote. As for how to do this, Velan Swami says, paraphrasing a bit, "Offer all work to God. Let Ganesh guide you. Act selflessly. Do your best. Be industrious. Stay above the fray. Stay focused. Align your will with the divine will. Enjoy the effort." Here's how that gets applied by one of HAF's board members, Prerna Kati Riker.
For me, karma yoga is, the spiritual practice of action. And I'm kind of like a person that likes to be busy and do things. So any actions that I take or any karmas that I do, I try to make sure that, they're punya karmas, first of all. And I try to do them with kind of a karma yoga mentality of, hey, I'm going to do this. I don't know what the result's going to be, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to fulfill my, responsibilities, do my best that I possibly can. Perhaps I go above and beyond because I'm a perfectionist, but that's kind of how I view karma yoga in everyday practice. For example, I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I work on a lot of new products that come out and medicines that are going to a patient. I kind of apply karma yoga in that, in completing my activities to the best of my ability, making sure everything's done correctly, compliantly. And, the karma yoga comes at the end of the day where maybe the medicine didn't work out as well as we expected in the clinical trial. But, I have kind of detachment from the end outcome result that it may not eventually go into a patient. But for me, I always go in with a mindset that it could be, and I try to, do my best that I can in that way.
Bhakti Yoga. Deriving from a Sanskrit word meaning adoring the divine, the path of Bhakti Yoga is focused on developing a deep personal loving relationship with, concentrating one's entire being on the divine. The outward expression of this can take multiple forms. Of all the non-asana paths of yoga, this one has grown immensely in the West in the past decade, with huge festivals dedicated to the musical expression of bhakti. Here's how HAF staff writer Sham Allard describes Bhakti Yoga in practice.
Growing up in a tradition where Bhakti Yoga is the focal point of the tradition, we're basically taught and what I try to, employ in my life is basically I'm trying to develop my own love for the source of where I come from. And I think by doing that, I can express that I feel more connected to everyone else and therefore express that love to them as well. Of course, bhakti yoga, or like connecting to the supreme through bhakti, otherwise known as devotion or love. And I think in one sense, it can seem like a very easy thing because at least for the people that we are already connected to, love comes pretty naturally. Like love comes pretty naturally from my mom, my dad. So it can seem like a very basic thing. But when it comes to developing that love for the source from which we came, though it seems like that should be natural, and I would say that theologically, philosophically, we believe that the inherent relationship is there, just like the inherent relationship exists between, say, an estranged father and son. They may not know each other, but it's natural for them to have a relationship. Even though there's an inherent nature or naturalness, per se, that comes to that, it's not necessarily so easy. So the idea is that every day, like, we have to practice. So I may have a spontaneous relationship with my wife or my mom or whatever. It's very natural. It becomes spontaneous. It doesn't come spontaneous to other people in my life necessarily, though it's obviously beneficial if I could learn to love everyone on some level. So that means that I have to practice. And that kind of practice, I would compare it, I like to compare it a little bit to learning an instrument. When you first learn how to play an instrument, they generally sit, like when I was playing guitar, I had to sit down and do a lot of boring scales. So you're just sitting there doing scales, doing just this boring practice over and over. And in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we call that Vaidhi Bhakti, which is basically devotional service and practice. So every day you're just practicing, you're practicing. Just like when you're playing guitar, you learn scales, you get better, slowly get better, slowly get better. You eventually get to the point where you can eventually express yourself freely. You can play guitar however you want. Whatever emotion you have, theoretically, on the highest level, like, say, Eric Clapton or obviously Jimi Hendrix, whatever they're feeling, they can just express it. So the idea is to practice it every day, and then through that practice, eventually get to the point where I actually feel it spontaneously for people and for Krishna naturally. So what does that practice look like? Well, it's about trying to see everyone and everything in connection to Krishna, who we see as the source of everyone and everything. The idea is by connecting with Krishna, we can connect with everyone else. So there are practices that we employ, like, for example, chanting a mantra, Hare Krishna. It's kind of like you're kind of getting in touch with, it's a mantra that puts you in touch with Krishna. You meditate on him. And the more you meditate on him, the more you meditate on how everything is connected to him and how we're all actually spiritual brothers and sisters that connect with each other.
Jnana Yoga. Often described as the yoga of knowledge, Jnana Yoga isn't intellectual or knowledge-based in the sense of acquiring and discussing facts or theories exactly, but rather is concerned with deeply examining what is transitory in existence and what is permanent, what is behind the transitory things we experience in life, determining what is unreal and real. Unreal here doesn't usually mean that our experience of life is fully false exactly, though some interpretations do go this far, only that it is transitory, ever-changing, and subject to interpretation, and that there is something per se real beyond that, which through meditation and contemplation we can attempt to grasp. The Vedanta Society of Southern California explains it this way, quote, "Whatever we take in through our senses, our minds, our intellects, is inherently restricted by the very nature of our bodies and minds. Brahman is infinite, it cannot be restricted. Therefore, this universe of change, of space, time, and causation, cannot be the infinite, all-pervading Brahman, the ultimate reality. Yet, what we perceive can be no other than Brahman. Brahman is infinite, all-pervading, and eternal. There cannot be two infinities. What we see at all times can only be Brahman. Any limitation is only our own misperception. Practitioners of Jnana Yoga remove this misperception through the negative process of discrimination between the real and the unreal, perceiving the world and noting, not this, not this, this is not permanent. And through the positive approach of self-affirmation, affirming what is real about ourselves, we are not limited to our physical bodies. There is more than what we usually perceive as our mind. In this way, our biological bodies are born, but there is something beyond that which was never born and will never die, though surely biological forms decay. We are pure, perfect, eternal, and free. That is the greatest truth of our being. Okay then, dear listeners, I hear you thinking, what about Kundalini Yoga, Yin Yoga, Vinyasa Yoga, Power Yoga, Restorative Yoga, Hot Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Goat Yoga, Beer Yoga, all of these things I see offered in yoga studios? Here's a brief and blunt rundown. Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini as a concept and description of energetic force has been described in Hindu sources of knowledge for centuries. As a type of yoga, though, Kundalini Yoga, despite claims of ancient origins by its creator Yogi Bhajan, a Sikh man who emigrated to the United States in the 1960s, is a comparatively recent synthesis of various existing breathing methods known within the broader yoga tradition. It perhaps doesn't diminish the value that contemporary practitioners of Kundalini Yoga derive from these breathing methods. Again, some of the techniques are a little different from those taught elsewhere within the Raja Yoga path. But Yogi Bhajan is now widely known to have been a serial sexual abuser of his female followers, presiding over a number of illegal businesses and scams, and in many ways can only be described as a grifter, primarily concerned with enriching himself. Yin Yoga, a relatively new variation on asana involving long holds of physical postures. It is not largely distinct from restorative yoga, which too involves long holds of seated or reclined physical postures to allow the body to relax. Both are calming and useful additions to the yoga canon. Vinyasa Yoga, Power Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, all vigorous variations on asana practice, linking physical movement with in and out breath, popularized by students of T. Krishnamacharya, who themselves went on to be nearly entirely responsible for building yoga asana into what it is in the world today. Important to note, Ashtanga Yoga, written in initial capital letters, specifically refers to the sequencing of asana and method of sequentially introducing them to students, developed by K. Patabi Joyce and promulgated by his students turned teachers. Ashtanga Yoga also refers to the eight-limbed method of yoga, Ashtanga meaning 8 limbs, as described in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and related texts. The latter is broader than the former, but not contradictory to one another. Now here's the blunt part. Goat Yoga, Beer Yoga, not yoga. Say it with me. Goat Yoga and Beer Yoga are not yoga. At least if we're at all concerned with seriously maintaining the tradition, goals, and evolving methods of any of the 4 traditional paths of yoga. It may be relaxing to have small goat feet walking on your back in asana, but it's an unuseful gimmick when the traditional goals of yoga are concerned. Drinking beer while doing asana? There's no categorical prohibition on drinking alcohol within the Hindu dharma traditions writ large, and India has a millennia-old indigenous tradition of brewing and fermenting alcohol, including plenty of historical texts describing the great variety of local liquors. But nearly all traditional yoga teachers would advise against anything other than a very moderate alcohol consumption, and most would advise against it entirely. Drinking beer as part of asana is just a bad idea. So where does that leave us? I know I promised no tut-tutting of those people who happily just practice asana, and perhaps much of this episode came across contrary to that. But I assure you, that's not the case. It is important, though, to know where one's yoga practice stands within the broader tradition and know the origins of the parts of that tradition. Ultimately, it's okay if you're practicing asana primarily for health benefits, be those physical or mental. Just know that traditionally speaking, those benefits are thought of as a side quest on the path to spiritual liberation. Ditto if you meditate with the main purpose of becoming, in the catchy phrasing of meditation mega podcaster and author Dan Harris, 10% happier. That 10% is an amazing thing, a potentially transformative thing, without any doubt. It is only one facet of a multifaceted tradition of spiritual endeavor, one of central importance to the Hindu Dharma traditions, as well as its cousin Dharma traditions, such as Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. You've made it to the end of this episode of All About Hinduism. Before you go, do me a favor. Leave us a nice 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Please also subscribe or follow us so you can get all of the new episodes the moment they're released. And if you found this episode informative, enjoyable, and useful, please share it right now with someone who will feel the same about it. Finally, you can help ensure that more of these get made by making a donation to HAF at hinduamerican.org/donate. Thanks for listening.